Hi, everybody. Okay, so we are asking you to find a table. We have 6 tables organized to have breakout discussions with leaders who've been our speakers throughout the program primarily. And you're going to have about 40 minutes to have conversations at your tables, meet people who are interested in similar topics, to learn more from our experts, and to talk about ways we might be able to move forward and solve some of these problems together. And then we'll wrap up and go to lunch.
I'm going to ask y'all to wrap up. Who at our table here would like to spend a minute? Just tell us what a highlight of what you discussed.
So our table is about clean energy transition, and really the highlight became a circular economy conversation around how to use waste to produce energy, right? How to divert out of landfills through pyrolysis and different processes to actually harvest the energy in order to add to the grid power. And that was really a lot of what we talked about and came through a lot of the different pieces.
Great. Well, we're going to talk about pyrolysis and the many applications of pyrolysis, as well as about a dozen recycling technologies that nature uses. How about over here? Is there someone who, I see someone pointing to you.
So we had a pretty lively conversation about the complexities of AI and how it is infiltrating and interrupting workforce. And at the same time, in other fields, it's actually creating additional opportunities. And so how we mitigate the environmental impact of AI, as well as the impact on real people.
Okay. Do you have something you wanted to say? Nope. AI is a powerful source. I have just used it to rewrite all my books much better than they were. So I'm going to keep using that. Jason. Yeah.
Hi. So we had a very riveting discussion about rural geothermal energy production, and Dr. Sharita Humphrey was able to explain a lot of it to me about what they're doing here in Texas and some awesome opportunities. And I'm from Idaho and Wyoming, so rural geothermal energy is very potent conversation up there right now. So it was very wonderful to hear more about it and see how it could be scaled maybe across the U.S. into different rural places to help bridge a lot of income and energy gaps between urban centers that are increasing their capacity and ability constantly, or rural ones are getting left behind. I mean, you mentioned that there's a community here in Texas in Prairie View that's still on 2G. And they increased 100% from 1G quite recently. So it's just amazing to hear a lot about that. So that's what we talked about.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Thank you, guys. And
hey there, I'm Allie Kelly. This is the HVDC supergrid table with Dr. Sandy McDonald, who has modeled a supergrid with NASA's supercomputers, and our team is working to accommodate the siting and efficient permitting of that grid in existing transportation rights of ways, including the railroad system and the interstate highway system. So a couple of things that we talked about. First of all, who knows what HVDC means? So we've spent time over the past day and a half talking about how the messenger is important, as is the message. So we've been working on the message and trying to translate this work into language that is more familiar to policymakers as well as to communities, because this is a great opportunity for both policy, economic development, and for communities to avoid having transmission lines that are needed to be installed through their communities or through greenfield, because we're talking about existing rights of ways being better leveraged. So we spent a lot of time talking about, how to frame this as an interstate system of energy, and how to lose high voltage direct current and its acronym altogether, and just talk about moving big energy that is agnostic to generation so that we can envelop all forms of generation, because we need all tools in the toolbox. So geothermal, natural gas, power plants, nuclear as well as small modular reactors, which the congressional panel talked about its evolution, as well as large-scale solar and large-scale wind, which are the lowest cost production of energy by an order of magnitude. And so we've also talked about, what are the barriers? So some of the barriers are that the utilities are still on the sidelines while the railroads and the state DOTs are in the conversation. And why are the utilities on the sidelines? There's been a checkered past of about 50 or 60 years of dealing with transportation agencies and accommodation in their rights of ways. And so some of this is cultural and behavioral, but some of it is real. The utilities, when they aggregate purchases of private land, they have total control over that land. But when they go into the right of way of a railroad system or the interstate highway system, they might only get a permit to encroach, right? And they're like, why would I take a permit when I could have full control over the land? So we have some negotiation and some work that still needs to happen between transportation and energy to make these happen, those stakeholders. And those are brand new relationships that only just began over the last 5 years with the scaling of electrified transportation. So we need to support collaboration across transportation and energy to actually make these projects, to support the communication so that the projects can happen from that communication. And lastly, we spent a lot of time talking about security. So I think it was our lunch keynote yesterday, David Tice, who talked about EMPs and the security threats and the vulnerabilities of our grid. And really what Sandy has modeled is meant to be an underground transmission system so that it is resilient from EMPs and more resilient from the actions of foreign actors who would like to take advantage of the existing vulnerabilities of the grid. I think that's about it. I mean, the last point is we talked about converter stations. I think Sandy's supergrid is modeled with 300 converter stations, which have typically been very large and thus very expensive. But the form factor and the technology of converter stations has become more compact and efficient, so they're much less expensive. And so we can model 300 converter stations so that every state gets a step down point so that the power can actually be shared among states, and we eliminate that flyover aspect of many multi-state interregional lines where states have to host the infrastructure but don't actually get access to that generation and access to that energy. And I think Sandy solved for that with his supergrid plan and the 300 converter stations. And thanks so much.
Thank you. We're going to take the AI that came from that table, and I'm going to take the recording of your words, and then we're just going to produce a white paper on this subject, so we can take forward the HVDC and this table. Who would like to give us a minute?
At this table, we discussed carbon pricing quite in depth. We focused mainly, I guess, on the carbon crediting markets because of the participants that were in this group. We looked at some of the issues that we were trying to solve for. So, for example, the lack of demand, the quality of credits, talking across the aisle that this should not be a partisan topic, not having regulation that is vulnerable to hacking by both the players and the government side, not picking winners and not picking winners, and the whole reliance on third party for reputation's sake in the carbon crediting markets. We also talk about some of the actions that could be taken to further carbon pricing in this space. So that might be innovation in carbon crediting standards. It might be local projects. It might be a lot about education and information and using terminology that's accessible to the audiences. We talked about integrating ecosystem benefits in the system and breaking down these conceptual complexity through education.
Terrific. And all of these ideas we're going to take forward into our planning process tomorrow when we have our leadership circle discussion this afternoon. After lunch, we'll do our circular economy discussion. And then tomorrow afternoon, we close it all by bringing together the ideas that you are formulating into a more coherent plan that will carry us forward for the next year. And at lunch today, you'll see where we are in that larger plan and some of the brand names that are accomplishing the most in that area. Yes.
Thanks, Bill. So at this table, we discussed kind of some of the more themes about what American Conservation Coalition is doing and the importance of broadening the group of people who are interested in climate. Victoria had some great contributions as a high school teacher on how she is teaching climate change and is even framing this as an issue that all sides of the aisle can engage on. And so we had some great dialogue about how we might be able to work together with ACC on that. And then Scott's group is doing some great work in Indiana on promoting public health there and taking advantage of the current political moment to do that. And so there's also overlap with ACC's work there. And so just continue to discuss that and how increased resourcing for conservative clean energy leadership is going to be really important to make this a durable and resilient and ambitious policy priority in the long term. So.
Terrific, and I will invite you all to go to lunch now in the Imperial Ballroom, which is on the mezzanine level up here, on the third floor. Oh, I'm sorry, it's on the third floor over here. And then after lunch, you're going to have the opportunity to speak a little more in depth with a couple of our luncheon speakers on the 10 brands who are our 10 brand heroes, each of them driving a positive change through the global supply chain. So we're going to have that conversation. We'll begin it at lunchtime briefly, and then we'll dive in as we begin our discussions of the circular economy this afternoon at 1:30. So join us for lunch right now, and we will see you up there, and then we'll see you back here at 1:30. All right. Thank you.